When a narcissist turns against a super empath, they think it will happen just like every other cycle they have planned out. Lie, throw away, control, repeat. But what they forget, and what they never count on, is that the super empath is not weak, clueless, or needy. They are someone who has walked through a mess and came out with a better understanding of people than the narcissist will ever have. When you betray someone like that, you are not just breaking trust, you are starting a big change. It is the moment when the person who carried all the emotional heavy lifting finally puts it down, stands up tall, and sees the narcissist clearly. And that clear sight is the narcissist's end. Nothing scares them more than someone who stops playing their game, someone who refuses to be used, and someone who understands their mask better than they do. The narcissist's betrayal wakes up the super empath's clear thinking and ends the fake reality. For a long time, the super empath acts from a place of honesty, loyalty, and deep emotional smarts that is often mistaken for weakness. They give kindness not because they are weak, but because they understand people at a deep gut level. This makes them patient, forgiving, and willing to look past the surface. The narcissist mistakes this patience for not seeing the truth, this kindness for neediness, and this deep feeling for something they can use without getting in trouble. They assume the super empath sees the world through the same fearful, fragile eyes they do, never realizing that the empath's strength comes from knowing themselves and knowing what is right. When the betrayal finally happens, when the narcissist crosses that last line that cannot be uncrossed, something moves inside the super empath. It is not anger, not sourness, and not revenge that comes up inside them, but a very sharp, focused calm. It is a realization that the person they tried to heal was never interested in growing, never able to give back, and never willing to match the deep love they were freely given. This clear thinking comes like a bright floodlight, showing every warning sign they once explained away, every change in the story they once excused, and every trick they once took in without fighting back. In this moment, the fake reality falls apart completely. The empath's mind starts replaying past times not with feelings, but with exact focus, as if they are studying a pattern from the outside instead of living inside it. They see how the narcissist made fake promises, built conflicts, and made cycles of mess to keep them unsteady. They remember moments where the narcissist used love as a weapon, silence as a punishment, or compliments as a trap. They spot the exact moments where their gut feeling whispered warnings that they chose to ignore because of love. Now, with the betrayal fully out in the open, that gut feeling becomes their best guide, pointing them toward the truth with total sureness. Betrayal becomes the spark that strips away every bit of the fake world the narcissist needed to keep control. The empath's emotional vision gets sharper, and they recognize the narcissist's actions not as being complicated, and not as pain that needs healing, but as planned patterns of using people designed to feed a weak ego. This waking up is powerful because super empaths do not wake up halfway. Once their clear thinking arrives, it is total, full, and cannot be turned back. They do not look back wishing for the past because their view is no longer twisted by hope or what could be. They see the narcissist exactly as they are. Someone who lives on using others. Someone who is afraid of being real. Someone who needs others to feel important. This clear sight changes the relationship instantly. The power the narcissist once held disappears because the super empath is no longer playing the emotional game. They stop taking in the narcissist's blame. They stop believing their accusations. They stop looking for their okay. They stop reacting to their buttons being pushed. The narcissist who once relied on emotional reactions to feel powerful suddenly finds themselves facing a person who has become safe from their tricks. This shift is crushing to the narcissist because control is the base of who they are. Without emotional control over the empath, they feel open, small, and threatened. This clear thinking gets bigger. The super empath begins taking back parts of themselves they had put aside without knowing it to keep the relationship going. Their confidence comes back. Their gut feeling gets stronger. Their emotional lines in the sand become sharper. Their sense of worth becomes undeniable. They reconnect with what they love, their goals, and their inner voice. They realize that their kindness is a gift, not a weakness, and that those who try to use it do not deserve to have it. With every new thought, the empath steps further out of the narcissist's mental shadow. This does not happen with anger, but with quiet sureness, because the moment clear thinking arrives, the empath no longer needs answers, apologies, or endings. They already understand everything. The fake image has shattered completely. And the narcissist, for maybe the first time, realizes they have been seen through in a way they cannot run from, trick, or talk their way out of. This is the moment where the power balance flips entirely. The super empath stands in truth, steady, and sure of themselves, while the narcissist holds on to the leftovers of the fake face they built. Without the empath's emotional energy to feed on, without the empath's attention to make them feel real, and without the empath's forgiveness to lean on, the narcissist begins to fall apart on the inside. What they once used to control now becomes proof of their own emptiness. They try to pull the empath back in using old tricks like love bombing, guilt, anger, and acting like the victim, but none of it works anymore because clarity has made the empath emotionally unreachable. The betrayal that was meant to weaken the empath ends up becoming the force that makes them stronger, while at the same time breaking down the narcissist's fake idea of being better. The empath's clear sight becomes a mirror. The narcissist cannot stand to look into a reflection that shows every insecurity, every lie, and every empty layer of who they are. Once this clarity exists, the relationship dynamic can never go back to what it was, because the super empath has finally seen the truth behind the mask the narcissist spent a lifetime building. A super empath's pulling away shatters the narcissist's control and shows their weakness. For the whole connection, the narcissist survives on the small emotional flows that move between them and the empath. They depend on those reactions, those looks of worry, those tries to fix the relationship, and those emotional investments that show the empath's depth. Every sigh, every tear, and every explanation the empath gives is seen by the narcissist as proof of power. They mistake emotional involvement for neediness. They assume that because the empath cares so much, they will stay forever. The narcissist's entire sense of being in charge is built on the guess that the empath will always come back, always forgive, and always look for a fix. What they never see coming is the quiet, firm moment when the empath stops responding altogether, when they pull away, not out of anger, but out of realizing the truth. This is the moment the narcissist never sees coming, because they believe their emotional hooks are forever and that the empath is tied by feelings rather than by choice. When the super empath withdraws, it is not a loud leaving, not a big fight, and not an emotional beg. It is a silent taking back of energy, a shift so deep that it sends a shockwave through the narcissist's carefully built world. Suddenly, the narcissist faces a reality they are not mentally ready to handle. There is no reaction to use, no explanation to twist, and no emotional response to use as a weapon. The empath is no longer playing the role the narcissist gave them. This creates an empty space the narcissist cannot stand. Their identity depends on controlling emotional moods. Without that control, they become shaky. They try the known tricks, fishing for a response, trying to make you jealous, making up a crisis, switching between kindness and meanness, all in an attempt to restart the emotional mess that once gave them power. But the empath, now pulled away, no longer reacts with the same openness. Their silence becomes the most powerful message they will ever give. This silence shows the narcissist's inner brittleness. Without the empath's emotional energy to feed on, their inside emptiness becomes impossible to ignore. They feel a type of mental choking because the empath's pulling away shines a harsh light on the narcissist's neediness. The person who believed they were better now realizes they were the one relying on the empath for feeling real, for control, and for emotional balance. The empath's absence shows just how little substance the narcissist actually has. This truth creates panic inside them. They may try to take back control by pretending not to care, by looking for new people to use, or by painting themselves as victims to others. But none of these plans fill the hole left by the empath leaving. The narcissist does not miss the empath as a person. They miss the control, the reactions, and the emotional food they once took so easily. The empath's withdrawal also breaks the narcissist's story. Narcissists create inside stories about being the best and unbreakable. These stories depend heavily on the agreement of those around them. When the empath stops playing along, the narcissist's story begins to fall down. They can no longer convince themselves that the empath is obsessed, attached, desperate, or loyal. The lack of emotional feedback forces them to face a truth they are scared to admit. The empath never needed them. They realized that all the emotional drama, the tricks, and the power plays were fake things kept alive only by the empath's willingness to join in. Without that joining in, the narcissist is left standing in a silence that feels shameful. They sense that their once perfect control has gone, and with it, the image they held of themselves begins to crack. Pulling away is the empath's ultimate show of strength because it requires deep emotional discipline. It means choosing peace over mess, boundaries over hurting oneself, and clear thinking over confusion. When the empath withdraws, they are not punishing the narcissist. They are taking back themselves. They are choosing to point their energy inward, to heal, to rebuild, and to remember who they were before the narcissist's influence dimmed their inner light. This act of pulling away forces the narcissist into a mental corner because it denies them the one thing they crave more than attention: control. Narcissists live on predictable emotional cycles, and the empath's refusal to join in destroys the rhythm they rely on. Without emotional control, the narcissist begins to fall apart. Their tries to draw the empath back become desperate. They may show up again with apologies, promises to change, sudden shows of openness, or claims of love. But the empath, now awake, sees these moves for what they are: tricks wrapped in charm. The kindness that once kept them involved is now guided by wisdom, not by duty. They recognize that real change is impossible for someone who sees relationships as tools rather than connections. Their pulling away becomes a shield, protecting them from falling back into the old patterns that once drained them. As the empath's distance grows, the narcissist's weakness becomes more visible. Their emotional shakiness increases. Their fake front begins to crack and their masks slip more often. They lash out, blame others, and spiral into feeling sorry for themselves because they cannot understand how they lost control of someone they believed they owned emotionally. This is the moment where their mental imbalance becomes undeniable. They are exposed not just to the empath, but to themselves, faced with the truth that their power was never real. It was always borrowed from the emotional generosity of the very person they tried to break. The narcissist's fall begins with this withdrawal because nothing is more threatening to a narcissist than being made to not matter. The empath's silence is a statement of freedom, a boundary, and a refusal to be used any longer. It signals a shift in the balance of power that cannot be turned back. Once the empath sees the narcissist clearly and takes back their emotional energy, the dynamic changes forever. The narcissist, stripped of control, must face the emptiness they spent their entire life trying to escape. That facing of truth is the beginning of their mental drop. Betrayal triggers the super empath's inner strength, turning pain into power. Within every empath lies a pool of strength that stays sleeping until it is pushed past a limit. The narcissist, believing they hold emotional mastery, never imagines that their planned betrayal will wake up this force. They assume the empath's sensitivity is a weakness, missing the truth that sensitivity is simply awareness, and awareness becomes strength. When clear thinking replaces fake ideas, when the betrayal lands, and when the empath finally sees the truth of what has been done to them, something old and powerful rises from within, a will to take back themselves, to stop shrinking, to stop explaining, and to stop giving too much. The pain becomes the spark that lights a deeper realization that their worth was never tied to how much they could take, but to the natural strength they carried all along. At first, the pain is shocking, not because the empath didn't feel the chance of betrayal, but because they trusted their own hope more than the narcissist's patterns. The betrayal cuts through the empath's emotional self, not quietly, but like a tearing that shows everything they ignored. Rather than falling under the weight of that pain, the super empath begins to rise from it. The pain becomes a truth teller. It serves as a mirror that reflects every pushed-down doubt, every moment they silenced their gut feeling, and every time they tried to fix what was never meant to be stable. Instead of making them weak, the pain organizes their mind. It brings their scattered emotional pieces back into line. The empath stops viewing the betrayal as a personal failure and instead recognizes it as a sign of the narcissist's true nature. This shift in view is what turns on the empath's inner strength. It begins internally, quietly, with a single decision, the decision to stop taking in someone else's problems. The empath starts taking back their emotional land piece by piece. They stop making excuses for cruelty. They stop accepting blame for things they didn't cause. They stop giving explanations that go unheard. Each boundary they create is an act of power. Each truth they accept is a step toward freedom. Pain, once too much, becomes the builder of their change. It sharpens their sight, strengthens their will, and reconnects them to the parts of themselves they once quieted. As this inner strength comes out, the empath begins seeing patterns they once misunderstood. They recognize how the narcissist used compliments to create need, how they used silence to cause fear, and how they used mess to control outcomes. They see exactly how their kindness was used, how their love was twisted, and how their forgiveness was used as a weapon. This understanding does not weaken them, it empowers them. For the first time, they step out of the emotional fog and into total clarity. They no longer feel forced to rescue, to explain, or to sacrifice themselves. The betrayal becomes the final lesson they needed to step into their true power. The empath's change is scary for the narcissist because it is silent, inside, and cannot be stopped. The narcissist can play with emotions, but they cannot control awareness. Once the empath becomes aware, the spell breaks. There is no argument the narcissist can use, no charm they can use, and no guilt they can push that will tie the empath back to the dynamic. The empath's strength grows not through fighting, but through letting go. They begin focusing on their own growth, their own healing, and their own direction. They find passions they left behind, reconnect with relationships they ignored, and line up with values they compromised. Every moment spent away from the narcissist becomes an investment in themselves. The empath's inner strength is not fueled by hate, but by understanding. They realize that the narcissist's behavior was never about them. The betrayal shows the narcissist's character, not the empath's worth. This truth becomes a mental shield, protecting the empath from taking in any more emotional attacks. They become grounded, centered, and calm. Their reactions become measured, their emotions become balanced, and their view becomes sharper. They build a calmness that the narcissist cannot break through, a calmness that shows true emotional mastery. As the empath grows stronger, the narcissist begins to lose control over their story. They cannot paint the empath as breakable, needy, or confused anymore. The empath's new strength forces the narcissist to face their own limits, something they have avoided their entire life. This is where the power shift becomes undeniable. The narcissist, once the boss in the emotional dynamic, becomes more and more unstable because they cannot understand how the empath has become safe from their tactics. They try to poke the old emotional reactions, but the empath responds with neutral feelings. They attempt to guilt trip, but the empath sees it instantly. They attempt love bombing, but the empath feels nothing. In the narcissist's eyes, the empath's strength looks like betrayal, but in reality, it is self-freedom. Pain becomes the empath's teacher, and growth becomes their win. The betrayal becomes the birthplace of a stronger self, one that is no longer needing outside applause or approval. The empath becomes emotionally self-sufficient, drawing strength from their awareness, wisdom, and experiences. Their boundaries become firm. Their gut feeling becomes sharpened. Their self-respect becomes something they won't trade. They rise from the betrayal not as a wounded soul, but as a changed one, carrying a power that is quiet, steady, and unshakable. This change marks a turning point the narcissist cannot undo. The empath's inner strength shines in ways the narcissist cannot copy or control. The empath becomes more emotionally smart, more self-aware, and more anchored in truth. Their clarity becomes a light that shows the narcissist's darkness. Their strength becomes a shield that bounces off tricks. Their presence becomes a reminder of what the narcissist cannot destroy. The narcissist watches the empath rise, not understanding how the very pain they caused became the source of the empath's power. The empath, now awake, sees everything clearly and steps forward, carrying the kind of strength that only comes from surviving deep emotional wounds. When the super empath detaches, the narcissist loses their supply of praise forever. The empath's presence in the narcissist's life is not just emotional support, but an entire source of mental fuel the narcissist depends on. Throughout the relationship, the narcissist feeds on praise, approval, attention, and the emotional richness the empath provides naturally. The empath notices details others miss, offers comfort without being asked, and brings emotional depth into interactions that the narcissist cannot create on their own. This emotional plenty forms the narcissist's sense of importance, and they become addicted to it, believing it will always be available. They think of the empath as an endless well of praise, loyalty, and emotional care. But what they fail to understand is that this well is not without conditions. It is kept alive by mutual respect, honesty, and giving back. Once betrayal or cruelty breaks that foundation, the empath's praise is not just damaged, it disappears completely. The narcissist reads praise wrong, seeing it as weakness. They see the empath's care as an invite to use them rather than a gift to honor. They believe the empath's devotion means they own them emotionally forever. They assume the empath will always admire them, even if treated badly, because they confuse kindness with desperation. But when the empath detaches, that fake idea falls down. The praise the narcissist relied on becomes out of reach. It is not held back out of revenge, but because the empath's view has changed. Praise cannot live with clarity. Once the empath sees the narcissist's true goals, patterns, and emotional emptiness, praise is replaced by understanding, and understanding removes the magic the narcissist once showed. Detaching is the empath's final waking up. It is not an emotional reaction, but a shift in thinking. The empath stops seeing the narcissist as someone who needs saving and starts seeing them as someone who needs to take responsibility. They stop feeling responsible for the narcissist's emotions and start feeling responsible for their own. This internal turn is what removes the connection that once allowed praise to flow. The empath no longer worships the potential of who the narcissist could be. They no longer overlook the harm in hopes of change. They no longer romanticize the intensity as passion. Detaching is what brings back their inner logic, rewires their emotional boundaries, and reshapes their view of the narcissist entirely. As the empath detaches, the narcissist feels the shift immediately. They feel it before they understand it. They notice the drop in emotional response, the lack of praise, and the lack of reaction to their pokes. The narcissist becomes unsettled because their entire identity is built on the belief that they are admired. They need praise in the same way a starving person needs food. Without it, their self-image begins to fall down. They try to restart the empath's praise by recycling past tricks, charms, apologies, promises, and shows of confidence. Attempts to appear powerful or successful, but none of it lands the way it used to. The empath's emotional clarity acts as a filter, protecting them from being pulled back into the fake world. The loss of praise is crushing for the narcissist because praise is their emotional air. Without it, they begin to feel small, unseen, and unimportant. They feel a deep inside discomfort, a sense of emptiness they cannot fill with surface wins or new people. The empath's praise was different from what others gave them. It was real, deep, intuitive, and healing. It made the narcissist feel special in a way that outside approval never could. Losing it creates a mental wound. The narcissist does not know how to fix. They seek replacements, but every new form of attention feels shallow compared to what the empath provided. The more they search, the more they realize the rareness of what they lost. Detaching also means the empath stops feeding into the narcissist's story. They no longer react to accusations, no longer take in blame, no longer defend themselves, and no longer participate in emotional loops. The narcissist cannot draw power from a person who refuses to play along. This lack of playing along strips the narcissist of the emotional rule they once held. They become wild, cycling between anger, neediness, pride, and feeling sorry for themselves. But the empath, now detached, remains unmoved. Their emotional energy is no longer available for taking. The narcissist's attempts feel see-through, predictable, and weak. The empath sees the tricks from a distance, recognizing it as a desperate attempt to regain lost power. As the empath continues to detach, they begin putting praise back into themselves. They channel the energy they once showered on the narcissist into their own growth, healing, and self-discovery. This internal redirection strengthens them further and makes it even harder for the narcissist to regain influence. The narcissist watches this shift and feels a deep sense of not mattering. They recognize that the empath's praise was the pillar of the entire relationship dynamic, and without it, the structure falls. They feel exposed, unimportant, and powerless. Their carefully built identity begins to crack because it was built on outside approval rather than inside substance. The most painful part for the narcissist is the realization that kindness and praise cannot be forced, manipulated, or faked. They are earned through consistency, honesty, and being real, qualities the narcissist lacks. The empath's detachment becomes the final proof that the narcissist was never as powerful as they believed. Their influence was always dependent on the empath's emotional investment. When that investment is withdrawn, the narcissist stands alone, confronted with a version of themselves they've spent their entire life avoiding. The empath's detachment becomes the moment the narcissist understands that they have lost something they will never get back. And no amount of charm, control, or tricks can bring back what was broken. The narcissist's fall begins the moment the super empath stops responding emotionally, because emotional reaction is the narcissist's lifeline. They depend on it for feeling valid, for control, and for a sense of importance they cannot make from within. Throughout the relationship, the narcissist reads every emotional response, whether it is sadness, frustration, confusion, or even love, as proof that they hold mental influence. They rely on the empath's emotional depth to define their own importance. They need the empath to feel intensely, to react predictably, and to engage with their drama, because those reactions act as mirrors reflecting the narcissist's internal dreams of power. When the empath stops responding, the narcissist experiences a sudden mental hole. It is like pulling the plug on the very energy source that kept their ego alive. The empath's emotional stillness is not an act, but a change. It is a sign that the empath has finally detached, not physically at first, but internally. They have stopped allowing the narcissist's words, moods, or tricks to influence their inner world. This shift is small, but deep. The empath begins watching instead of absorbing. They start seeing patterns instead of feeling responsible for them. They recognize manipulation instead of mistaking it for misunderstanding. The narcissist's usual buttons fail to get the desired reaction, and this lack of response threatens the narcissist's entire identity. Control requires reaction, and without reaction, control dissolves. The empath's silence becomes the one truth the narcissist cannot escape. It confronts them with their own smallness. The narcissist cannot stand emotional neutrality because it exposes the hollowness of their influence. When the empath responds in the past, the narcissist feels powerful. But silence forces the narcissist to recognize that their power was never real. It was borrowed from the empath's willingness to engage. This realization starts fear, anger, and desperation inside the narcissist. They begin ramping up their behavior, attempting to provoke the empath using stronger tactics. They might become more dramatic, more aggressive, more charming, or more pitiful, cycling through every trick they know. With every failed attempt, their internal panic grows. Emotional non-response is crushing to the narcissist because it reveals something they have spent their entire life trying to hide in their emotional neediness. They have always told themselves they were the dominant one, the admired one, and the better one. But when the empath stops reacting, it becomes clear that the narcissist was the one relying on the empath for mental survival. Their entire self-image begins to crack. They feel unseen, unheard, unimportant, and unrelated. The empath's emotional withdrawal becomes a mirror reflecting the emptiness the narcissist has tried to avoid at all costs. This shift also exposes the limits of the narcissist's tricks. Without emotional feedback, the narcissist cannot measure the empath's weakness. They cannot guess whether their tactics are working. They cannot control the story. Their words lose impact. Their gestures lose meaning. Their presence loses weight. The empath's calm, steady lack of reaction becomes a shield that the narcissist cannot break. It creates a wall the narcissist has no tools to break through because their entire mental strategy relies on the empath's emotional openness. Once that openness closes, the narcissist is left powerless. As the empath stops responding, they also begin to regain their sense of self. The emotional space that was once occupied by worry, confusion, and overthinking becomes available for self-reflection. The empath starts understanding themselves more deeply, reconnecting with their values, their strength, and their gut feeling. This internal grounding makes them even less reactive. Their emotions become steady instead of messy. Their thoughts become clear instead of overwhelmed. They begin healing from the inside out, and this healing further weakens the narcissist's influence. A healed empath cannot be controlled by a wounded narcissist. The narcissist tries to take back charge by switching between different faces. One moment they appear sorry, the next moment they don't care, and shortly after that angry, But each phase fails to provoke the empath because the empath no longer takes in the narcissist's emotional shows. They see each shift as a trick, not as truth. The narcissist realizes they have lost the ability to confuse the empath, and confusion was one of their strongest weapons. Without confusion, the empath becomes safe from tricks. And this safety marks the beginning of the narcissist's collapse. The empath's lack of emotional response also hurts the narcissist's sense of being better. Narcissists rely on feeling more powerful, more smart, or more wanted than the people around them. When the empath stops reacting, the narcissist starts doubting their own appeal. They question their importance, their charm, their control, even their identity. They begin comparing themselves to others, fearing they are not enough. This insecurity grows fast because the empath's silence feels like rejection, and rejection is the one experience the narcissist cannot stand. It threatens their entire mental structure. As the empath's emotional distance grows, the narcissist begins falling apart inside. They become more impulsive, more unstable, and more unpredictable. They may try to punish the empath with silence or distance, but it backfires because the empath no longer fears being left alone. They may try to provoke jealousy, but the empath no longer values their approval. They may attempt to love bomb, but the empath no longer responds to surface-level affection. Every tactic that once worked loses effectiveness. Every strategy that once granted control becomes useless. The narcissist realizes they are powerless not because the empath is cruel, but because the empath has awakened. The empath's emotional neutrality becomes a statement of freedom. It signals that the narcissist no longer occupies space in their heart or mind. It says that the empath has taken back their emotional rule. This loss of emotional influence is the narcissist's greatest defeat. It forces them into a meeting with the truth they have avoided their entire life. They cannot force love, respect, or praise from someone who has awakened to their lies. And once the empath's emotional response dies, the narcissist's power dies with it. When the narcissist realizes that the person they looked down on, used, and tried to diminish has finally stepped into their full emotional power, a silent panic rises within them because your growth destroys the version of reality they built to keep control over you. They begin to sense that the bond they relied on, the emotional access they enjoyed, and the praise they quietly harvested from you are no longer available. And this loss shakes them more deeply than they would ever admit, because their ego depends on believing that they are unforgettable, irreplaceable, and forever central in the lives of those they once ruled. When you take back your worth and detach from their influence, they experience a collapse of the fake idea that they are in control. This collapse forces them to face a truth they have spent their entire lives running from, that the power they believed they had over others was never rooted in strength but in lies, tricks, and the emotional openness of the people they targeted. As you grow, heal, and rise, it forces them to see that your strength was always greater than their fake front. This turnaround starts a deep internal trouble because they cannot stand the idea that someone they once treated badly has now become emotionally unreachable, independent, and sure of themselves in ways that expose the emptiness of their own identity. They begin to search for ways to come back into your life, not because they have changed, but because your newfound strength threatens the entire base of their self-image. The narcissist's greatest fear is losing relevance in a life they once controlled so easily. Your change becomes a mirror that reflects their weaknesses, their insecurities, and their inability to truly connect with another human being. This reflection is something they spend their entire existence avoiding. Yet your growth forces them to face it, even if only in the quiet corners of their mind that they never reveal to anyone. As you lift yourself emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, the narcissist begins to feel exposed because their tricky tactics no longer work on you. Without the ability to control your emotions, they lose the one thing that made them feel powerful in the first place. Your emotional distance becomes a form of holding them responsible they never expected to face. Suddenly, the games they used to play stop getting the results they were addicted to, leaving them frustrated, threatened, and deeply unsettled by your growth. They may attempt to provoke you, bait you, or pull you back into the old dynamic, but each failed attempt reminds them that you have outgrown the cycle they depended on. This realization cuts them more deeply than any fight ever could, because for the first time, they see that they no longer have the influence they believed was permanent. As your energy shifts, they feel a hole where your empathy, attention, and emotional work used to be. That hole becomes impossible for them to ignore because it reveals how dependent they were on the supply you provided without ever recognizing its value. In your absence, they struggled to copy the emotional food you gave because their relationships are built on surface things, not real connection. Your leaving reveals how empty those other connections truly are. The narcissist's reaction to your growth becomes a mix of fear, jealousy, regret, and desperation. Yet, they will never admit any of it because owning these feelings would require them to face their own flaws. Self-awareness is something they avoid at all costs. Instead, they watch your change from the shadows, pretending they are untouched while internally battling the reality that they pushed away the one person who truly cared for them, understood them, and saw value in them, even when they didn't deserve it. Your rising confidence exposes their internal instability. Your emotional clarity highlights their mess, and your self-love reveals the hollowness of the face they hide behind. This contrast becomes their silent torture, because it forces them to face the life they could have had if they were capable of real connection. As you continue to grow, they are left struggling with a sense of loss that cannot be fixed, not of you as a person, but of the emotional power they once enjoyed. This loss becomes one of the few experiences that genuinely touches their emotions, even if they cannot express it in a healthy or caring way. Your growth becomes the karma they never expected, because it requires nothing from you. No revenge, no fight, no explanation, just the quiet, steady growth of your strength, which becomes a reminder of everything they tried to push down in you. Their fear grows as they realize that you have become someone they can no longer trick, influence, or make small. That realization becomes the turning point where the power dynamic shifts entirely in your favor, leaving them to deal with an emptiness that no new person can fill. Because what they lost was not just a person, but an entire source of emotional energy they will never be able to replace.